They sang about love, heartbreak, and small-town pride. But behind the curtain, some of country music's biggest names were absolute nightmares. This is the dark side of Nashville no fan wants to believe exists. From drunken outbursts and arrogance to betrayal and scandal, these are the 11 worst jerks in country music history. Stars once adored, now despised. The question is, how much do you really know about the people you once loved? One, Blake Shelton, the good old boy who wasn't so good after all. At first glance, Blake Shelton was everything country music wanted its modern stars to be. Handsome, funny, a little rough around the edges, but full of charm. The Oklahoma native rose from bar gigs to national fame, with his deep voice and small-town humor turning him into a household name. Songs like Austin and God Gave Me You made him seem like the perfect gentleman, loyal, relatable, and down to earth. Fans adored him not only for his music, but for the way he made country feel fun again. He wasn't just a singer, he was the guy next door who made it big. But behind that easy smile and self-deprecating humor, a darker picture started to form. Those who worked closely with him on The Voice described a man who was demanding, arrogant, and often cruel when the cameras weren't rolling. Crew members mentioned sarcastic jabs that crossed the line, and contestants revealed he could be cold and dismissive if they didn't fit his idea of real country. What fans saw as witty banter was often, in private, cutting cruelty. The charming cowboy from Oklahoma had turned into someone who thought the world owed him its laughter. His heavy drinking, once part of his good old boy image, became harder to defend. There were reports of public outbursts and drunken tweets, some mocking fans, others taking aim at fellow artists. Many dismissed it as Blake being Blake, but over time, the jokes stopped being funny. What once looked like honesty started to feel like mean-spiritedness wrapped in charisma. His humor turned sharp, his words reckless. It wasn't the country hero fans thought they knew. It was a man intoxicated not just by whiskey, but by fame itself. Then came his highly publicized divorce from Miranda Lambert, one of country's most beloved stars. For a while, it looked like a simple heartbreak story, two artists growing apart. But whispers of infidelity, ego, and emotional manipulation began to circulate, painting Blake as far less innocent than his public image suggested. When he quickly moved on with Gwen Stefani, many fans felt they were watching a man who had completely left the values of country behind for Hollywood glitter. Today, Blake Shelton still fills arenas, still smiles for the cameras, but for many who once adored him, the magic is gone. He's a reminder that the biggest personalities in country music often hide the darkest flaws, and that sometimes the everyman hero is just another act in Nashville's grand illusion. 2. Morgan Wallen, the rebel who went too far. Few artists have skyrocketed in country music the way Morgan Wallen did. With his rugged voice, mullet haircut, and unapologetic attitude, he became the face of a new generation of fans who wanted something raw, unfiltered, and defiant. Songs like Whiskey Glasses and Wasted on You turned him into a global sensation, a symbol of real country rebellion in an era of polished Nashville pop. For many, he represented authenticity, the kind of Southern boy who said what he thought and didn't care what anyone else believed. But the truth, as it turned out, was far messier. Morgan's troubles started early, and they never really stopped. From the beginning, stories of bar fights, drunken arrests, and volatile behavior followed him wherever he went. His charm on stage contrasted sharply with what insiders described as an ego inflated by sudden fame. He seemed to thrive on controversy, acting out like the rules didn't apply to him. Fans called him real. Critics called him reckless. Both were right. Then came the scandal that changed everything. In early 2021, a video surfaced showing Morgan using a racial slur outside his home after a night of heavy drinking. The backlash was immediate. His label suspended him, radio stations pulled his music, and award shows banned him from attending. For a moment, it looked like his career was finished. But instead of fading, something darker happened. His popularity exploded. Fans, angry at cancel culture, rallied behind him, pushing his album to record-breaking sales. Morgan Wallen had become both a cautionary tale and a cultural flashpoint, a man too flawed to celebrate, too successful to ignore. Behind the headlines, the pattern continued. Even as he apologized publicly, his private life stayed chaotic. More reports of outbursts, fights, and reckless drinking kept surfacing. Insiders described a man who had never learned humility, who saw every scandal as proof of his untouchable status. What had once been country boy honesty had evolved into pure arrogance. He wasn't rebelling against Nashville anymore. He was rebelling against accountability itself. Today, Morgan Wallen remains one of country music's biggest stars, but also one of its most polarizing. To some, he's the outlaw who speaks his mind. To others, he's the reminder of how fame can excuse almost anything. In the end, his story is not just about a talented singer who went too far. It's about an audience that kept cheering while he fell. 3. Toby Keith, the patriot who became Nashville's bully. In the early 2000s, Toby Keith was untouchable. With his booming voice, flag-waving anthems, and larger-than-life swagger, he stood as the embodiment of post-9/11 American pride. Songs like Courtesy of the Red, White, and Blue and Beer for My Horses made him a hero to millions. The kind of artist who could fill stadiums with soldiers, bikers, and working-class fans who saw him as one of their own. He wasn't just a singer, he was a symbol. But behind that patriotic image was a man known for something far less noble: a vicious temper and a ruthless ego. Toby's rise was as aggressive as his personality. Those who worked with him in Nashville described him as intimidating, confrontational, and obsessed with control. Producers recalled meetings that felt more like interrogations. Journalists who questioned him risked public humiliation. And when he decided he didn't like someone, whether a critic, fellow musician, or even an awards show, he made sure the world knew it. He didn't just play the tough guy. He lived it, burning bridges as fast as he built hits. His infamous feud with the Dixie Chicks became one of the ugliest chapters in modern country history. After Natalie Maines criticized his pro-war anthem, Toby responded with open hostility, projecting her face alongside Saddam Hussein during live performances. What began as a political disagreement turned into a personal crusade of revenge. For many fans, it was the moment they saw Toby not as a proud patriot, but as a man blinded by rage and ego. Colleagues described a pattern of belittling others, dismissing new artists, and treating his team like subordinates rather than collaborators. Even when his fame peaked, humility was never part of his brand. He thrived on conflict, whether picking fights with critics or mocking younger stars he saw as soft. That defiance once made him relatable. Now it made him bitter. As years passed, Toby's persona hardened. His music grew louder, but his message more one-dimensional. Pride without reflection, bravado without balance. Many who once celebrated his authenticity began to see something darker. A man trapped inside his own myth, unable to separate patriotism from hostility. When Toby Keith passed away, tributes poured in for his legacy as a hitmaker and entertainer. Yet even in mourning, there was an unspoken truth among Nashville insiders. Toby was brilliant, bold, and unforgettable, but also one of the most difficult, domineering figures the industry had ever seen. He sang for America, but often forgot the grace that made America love him back. For the Dixie Chicks, Natalie Maines. From beloved rebels to Nashville's outcasts. At the turn of the millennium, the Dixie Chicks were the brightest stars in country music. Natalie Maines, with her bold voice and fiery personality, led the trio to dominate charts with hits like Wide Open Spaces and Cowboy Take Me Away. They were unstoppable, charming, outspoken, and refreshingly rebellious in a genre often ruled by quiet conformity. Fans saw them as fearless women who stood for independence and talent. But the same spirit that made them heroes would soon turn them into Nashville's most hated figures. It all started in March 2003, during a concert in London. As the U.S. prepared for war in Iraq, Natalie Maines told the crowd, "We're ashamed that the President of the United States is from Texas." The comment lasted only seconds, but it detonated like a bomb back home. Within days, radio stations banned their music, fans destroyed CDs, and fellow country artists publicly condemned them. The Dixie Chicks weren't just criticized, they were exiled. At first, many sympathized with them, calling the backlash unfair. But what followed turned sympathy into resentment. Instead of showing humility or seeking reconciliation, Natalie Maines doubled down, giving interviews mocking traditional country fans and calling the industry small-minded. She refused to apologize, describing herself as a free thinker in a dumb world. To some, that was courage. To others, it was arrogance dressed as integrity. Behind the scenes, the group fractured under the pressure. Those who worked with them described a tense atmosphere where Natalie's temper and sharp tongue dominated every decision. She reportedly alienated managers, label executives, and even fellow musicians who tried to advise caution. You couldn't tell her anything. One insider recalled, she believed she was smarter than everyone else in Nashville. When they returned with the album Taking the Long Way, it was artistically brilliant but emotionally distant, a declaration of defiance rather than reconciliation. The message was clear. They didn't need country anymore, but in abandoning the community that built them, they became symbols not of rebellion, but of bitterness and division. Years later, the Dixie Chicks, now renamed the Chicks, tried to revive their image with messages of empowerment and unity. Yet for many who once adored them, the trust was gone. The band that once spoke for the people had turned against them. Natalie Maines may have won her war of words, but she lost something far more powerful, the love of a generation that once called her their hero. 5. Hank Williams Jr., the rebel who couldn't control his rage. Few names carry the same weight in country music as Hank Williams Jr., the son of a legend, a man who turned his father's tragedy into his own anthem of defiance. For decades, Bocephus was the wild heart of outlaw country, loud, proud, and unapologetically American. Hits like A Country Boy Can Survive and Family Tradition made him an icon, bridging the gap between Southern rock and honky-tonk tradition. But beneath the outlaw charm and the whiskey-soaked voice lay a man whose temper, politics, and ego turned him into one of Nashville's most volatile figures. Hank Jr.'s reputation for being unfiltered was once his biggest selling point, until it became his curse. From the 1980s onward, he was known for outbursts on stage, political rants, and public feuds with artists who disagreed with him. He didn't just speak his mind. He attacked, insulted, and mocked anyone who challenged him. What began as rebellious authenticity slowly warped into uncontrolled aggression. The bad boy act stopped feeling like a persona and started looking like who he really was. The tipping point came in 2011 when he appeared on Fox and Friends and compared President Obama to Hitler while criticizing a golf game between Obama and John Boehner. The backlash was swift. ESPN dropped his long-running Monday Night Football theme, and the country community distanced itself. But Hank Jr. didn't apologize. He doubled down, releasing songs calling the president a dictator and labeling his critics the enemy. The rebel spirit that once made him beloved now made him dangerous. Behind the scenes, it was no better. Musicians and tour staff described him as difficult, unpredictable, and prone to explosive anger. He would berate opening acts, insult reporters, and storm off stage mid-performance. Alcohol only fueled the fire, and many insiders admitted they feared being around him when he drank. For a man who spent decades trying to escape his father's shadow, Hank Jr. ended up haunted by his own. A legacy of self-destruction hidden behind patriotic slogans and defiance. Even fans who once adored him began to turn away. Some couldn't stomach his political tirades. Others were simply exhausted by the bitterness that had replaced the humor and humanity in his songs. In the end, Hank Williams Jr. became the living embodiment of a question that country music still struggles with. When does authenticity stop being real and start being cruel? He will always be a legend, but a complicated one. Proof that rebellion without reflection can turn even the proudest outlaw into his own worst enemy. 6. Jason Aldean, the small-town hero who lost his way. For years, Jason Aldean was the modern face of country's working-class America. With his baseball cap, southern drawl, and blue-collar swagger, he became the symbol of what fans called real country. Songs like Dirt Road Anthem, She's Country, and My Kinda Party turned him into a superstar, a man who spoke to every truck-driving, hard-working fan across the South. He built a brand on small-town values, loyalty, family, pride. But behind the music and image, Aldean's story became one of hypocrisy, controversy, and arrogance, showing that even the most patriotic persona can crumble under its own contradictions. His downfall began, quite literally, under the spotlight. In 2012, Aldean was caught kissing another woman, Brittany Kerr, while still married to his high school sweetheart, Jessica Ussery. The photos went viral, shattering the family man image he'd built for years. At first, he brushed it off as a mistake, but when he divorced Jessica and later married Brittany, fans felt betrayed. The same man who sang about faithfulness and small-town morals had broken the code he preached. Even some of his own peers in Nashville quietly distanced themselves, calling the affair a wake-up call about who Aldean really was. But that was only the beginning. As Aldean's fame grew, so did his ego. Reporters described him as cold, dismissive, and intolerant of criticism. He rarely engaged with fans off stage, and many who met him backstage described him as arrogant and bored. Insiders claimed he often demanded special treatment and refused to share credit with songwriters or producers. The country boy charm had turned into celebrity detachment, the kind that feels more Hollywood than Nashville. Then came Try That in a Small Town, the song that sparked national outrage. To supporters, it was an anthem of pride and resilience. To critics, it was a thinly veiled threat, glorifying violence and exclusion. The accompanying music video, filmed in front of a courthouse tied to a history of racial violence, poured gasoline on the fire. Aldean defended himself angrily, refusing to acknowledge the deeper issue. His refusal to listen only solidified his image as tone-deaf, self-righteous, and fueled by ego rather than empathy. Jason Aldean still commands massive crowds, and his loyal base hasn't left him. But even among longtime fans, there's a sense that something was lost, that the man who once celebrated small-town decency has drifted too far from it. The irony couldn't be sharper. The voice of the ordinary man became a symbol of everything ordinary people are tired of: hypocrisy, arrogance, and a complete loss of humility. In the end, Aldean's story isn't just about fame gone wrong. It's about how easily authenticity can become performance, and how even the most relatable stars can forget what made them real in the first place. Garth Brooks, the superstar who outgrew his own humility. No one has ever conquered country music quite like Garth Brooks. In the 1990s, he redefined what a country artist could be, selling out stadiums, smashing records, and blending rock theatrics with heartland storytelling. Songs like Friends in Low Places and The Dance became anthems of a generation. He wasn't just a musician, he was a phenomenon, a man whose charisma made country feel larger than life. To his fans, Garth was the ultimate good guy, humble, grateful, and down to earth. But behind the charming grin and cowboy hat was a perfectionist so controlling and self-centered that even Nashville insiders whispered about the cult of Garth. From the start, Brooks was obsessed with every detail: the lights, the camera angles, the set lists, even the way fans should react. He didn't just perform, he commanded. Producers and stage crews described him as a genius with a god complex, someone who demanded absolute control. He didn't tolerate mistakes, and he didn't share credit easily. "You weren't working with Garth," one former associate said. "You were working for him." As his fame exploded, so did his sense of invincibility. Brooks began crafting an image that felt less like authenticity and more like carefully engineered sincerity. His emotional speeches, his constant "aw shucks" charm, they started to feel rehearsed. Even his temporary retirement in 2001, framed as a sacrifice to spend time with family, later seemed like a publicity maneuver. When he returned a decade later with massive Vegas shows and multi-million-dollar tours, fans realized Garth had never really left the spotlight. He had just learned how to control it better. But perhaps nothing captured his ego more than his ill-fated alter ego, Chris Gaines. In 1999, Brooks launched a bizarre rock persona, complete with black eyeliner, wigs, and a fictional backstory. It was meant to expand his artistry. Instead, it became one of the most ridiculed moves in music history. Critics mocked him for being tone-deaf and delusional, and even die-hard fans struggled to defend the experiment. Yet instead of admitting failure, Garth doubled down, insisting the world just didn't get it. Behind closed doors, his relationships with other stars were tense. Rumors swirled about feuds with George Strait and Alan Jackson, both of whom quietly criticized his showmanship over substance approach. Insiders said Garth's competitiveness bordered on obsession. He measured every career in Nashville against his own. If he's not number one producer said, he's miserable. Today, Garth Brooks remains one of the best-selling solo artists in history, a living legend. But among those who've worked closest to him, there's a quiet consensus. The man who preached humility became the machine he once rejected. His success is undeniable, but so is the cost. A reminder that in country music, fame isn't supposed to feel this calculated. 8. LeAnn Rimes, the angel voice that fell from grace. When LeAnn Rimes first appeared on the scene at just 13, the world thought it had found the second coming of Patsy Cline. With her powerhouse vocals and timeless country tone, she was hailed as a prodigy, the girl who could carry the torch of classic country into a new generation. Songs like Blue and How Do I Live made her a household name before she was old enough to drive. She was innocent, gifted, and adored by millions. But as fame grew, so did the shadows around her. And over the years, LeAnn's story transformed from a fairy tale into one of the industry's most uncomfortable cautionary tales. The cracks began to show early. LeAnn's relationship with her father and manager, Wilbur Rimes, deteriorated into a bitter legal battle over money. She sued her own parents at 16, accusing them of taking millions from her earnings. The lawsuit shocked fans who had seen her as the sweet girl from Mississippi. Insiders said fame had made her impatient and controlling, a teenager who acted like a mogul. Those close to her described her as fierce, talented, and nearly impossible to please. The innocence that once defined her was quickly replaced by ambition that bordered on ruthlessness. But nothing damaged her image more than the scandal that came years later. In 2009, while married to backup dancer Dean Sharamette, LeAnn began an affair with actor Eddie Cibrian, who was also married at the time. The two were caught together on camera during the filming of Northern Lights, igniting a tabloid firestorm. Overnight, LeAnn, once America's sweetheart, became country's homewrecker. Fans turned on her, and social media was merciless. Her attempts to defend herself only made things worse. Instead of humility, she gave interviews laced with sarcasm and blamed others for misunderstanding her. The fallout consumed her career. Radio stopped playing her songs. Award shows stopped calling. And in her frustration, LeAnn lashed out publicly, posting cryptic, bitter messages on Twitter, attacking critics, and even engaging in feuds with Cibrian's ex-wife, Brandi Glanville. What once looked like confidence began to look like spite. Even sympathetic fans admitted she had become her own worst enemy. Behind the gossip, there was also tragedy, years of anxiety, breakdowns, and rehab. But by then, the damage to her reputation was done. Nashville, a town that values loyalty and family, never fully forgave her. To many, LeAnn Rimes remains a symbol of wasted potential, the voice that could have defined a generation, undone by ego, scandal, and self-destruction. Her story is heartbreaking, not because she failed, but because she had everything: the talent, the heart, the legacy, and traded it for the illusion of control. In country music, redemption is always possible. But for LeAnn Rimes, it may take more than a song to earn back the love she lost. 9. Billy Ray Cyrus, the father who chased fame instead of family. In the early 1990s, Billy Ray Cyrus was the fresh face of country stardom. His breakout hit Achy Breaky Heart swept across the world, blending honky-tonk rhythm with pop hooks and turning him into an instant sensation. He had the mullet, the grin, and the down-home charm, the perfect recipe for mainstream success. For a moment, he was the man every fan wanted to meet and every label wanted to sign. But as fast as his fame rose, it began to twist into something else. A desperate hunger to stay relevant, no matter the cost. Over time, Billy Ray Cyrus would go from country heartthrob to fame-hungry self-parody, and worse, a father accused of exploiting his own children's spotlight. After Achy Breaky Heart burned through the charts, critics dismissed him as a one-hit wonder. That wound cut deep. Determined to prove them wrong, Billy Ray spent years chasing reinvention, in acting, pop collaborations, and even gospel. Yet with every new project, he seemed to drift further from the authenticity that made him famous. Insiders from Nashville recall that he became obsessed with recognition, more interested in image than artistry. Billy wanted to be Elvis, one producer said. But he didn't want to do the work. He just wanted the spotlight. When his daughter Miley Cyrus exploded into superstardom through Hannah Montana, Billy found himself back in the public eye, not as a musician, but as the dad of a pop icon. At first, he embraced the role with pride, appearing on screen with her and promoting their tight family bond. But behind the scenes, things weren't as wholesome as they looked. As Miley's image transformed from Disney darling to shock provocateur, Billy rode the wave instead of guiding her away from it. His refusal to set boundaries and his willingness to appear in interviews defending even her most controversial choices made many believe he was using her fame to stay relevant. By the late 2010s, their relationship fractured. In interviews, Miley subtly accused her father of manipulation and emotional distance. Around the same time, Billy Ray reinvented himself again, marrying singer Fire Rose, who is decades younger, and publicly clashing with his own children over loyalty and inheritance. What had once looked like a close-knit Southern family turned into a very public feud. For many country fans, the transformation was hard to watch. The man who once sang about sincerity and heartbreak had become a tabloid regular, more famous for drama than music. Billy Ray Cyrus's tragedy isn't that he fell, it's that he chose the fall. In chasing fame, he lost the one thing that country music holds sacred: authenticity. Today, he stands as a cautionary tale, proof that the road from Nashville to Hollywood is paved not just with ambition, but with broken hearts, especially the ones closest to home. 10. Miranda Lambert, the country queen with a tempered crown. For nearly 2 decades, Miranda Lambert has ruled country music with grit, fire, and undeniable talent. Her songs, Gunpowder and Lead, The House That Built Me, Vice, spoke to millions of women who saw in her a symbol of strength and rebellion. She wasn't a polished Nashville princess. She was raw, real, and fierce. Fans adored her authenticity, that sharp tongue and fearless attitude that made her feel more outlaw than angel. But as the years went on, the same defiant spirit that built her empire began to reveal another side: a diva's ego and a temper that burned bridges faster than her hits climbed the charts. Behind the scenes, Miranda was known as a perfectionist, and not in a good way. Former bandmates and tour staff described her as moody, unpredictable, and quick to snap at anyone who crossed her. Her fiery personality, which once seemed empowering, started to look like unchecked arrogance. Reports of shouting matches backstage, snide remarks about other artists, and icy interactions with journalists became too frequent to ignore. Even fellow country stars joked that Miranda was someone you didn't want to get on the wrong side of, because she never forgot, and she never forgave. Her divorce from Blake Shelton in 2015 only added fuel to the fire. Fans initially sympathized with her, seeing Blake as the unfaithful husband who broke her heart. But as more details emerged, the story flipped. Rumors spread that Miranda herself had been unfaithful multiple times, with sources close to both sides hinting that she wasn't the victim, but the storm. Nashville insiders described her as someone who couldn't handle not being the center of the story. Every heartbreak became a headline, every song a veiled jab. Then came the infamous salad incident in 2019. During a restaurant argument in Nashville, Lambert reportedly threw salad at a woman after an exchange over her husband, Brendan McLaughlin. It sounded absurd, but it perfectly captured how her temper had become part of her brand. Instead of addressing it with grace, she laughed it off, adding to the perception that she saw herself as untouchable. Even her fans began to notice a shift. At concerts, Miranda occasionally scolded fans for taking selfies or not paying attention, moments that went viral and painted her as entitled. For someone who built a career on being the voice of the people, she seemed to be turning against them. The country girl from Texas had become the Nashville queen, but one whose throne felt colder every year. Miranda Lambert is still a powerhouse, still one of the best songwriters of her generation. But behind the music lies a legacy complicated by attitude and ego. She's living proof that strength and arrogance often walk a fine line, and that even a country queen can lose her crown when she forgets the humility that built it. 11. Johnny Cash, the man in black and the shadows he hid behind. To the world, Johnny Cash was the soul of country music, a man who carried pain, faith, and rebellion in every note he sang. His voice, deep and steady as the Mississippi, told stories of outlaws, sinners, and broken men searching for redemption. He became a hero to the downtrodden, a symbol of truth and defiance wrapped in black. But behind that mythic image, the man in black was fighting demons that would consume his relationships, his health, and at times, his humanity. Cash's early success in the 1950s was dazzling, but the fame that came with it unleashed his worst impulses. On the road constantly, he turned to amphetamines and barbiturates to stay awake, and then to dull the guilt that followed. The result was chaos. Bandmates recalled tours descending into mayhem, with Cash destroying hotel rooms, crashing cars, and disappearing for days in drug-fueled benders. Once, he accidentally set fire to a forest in California while high, killing hundreds of endangered condors, an act that earned him one of the first major environmental fines ever given to a celebrity. At home, his addictions and volatility destroyed his first marriage. Vivian Liberto, the woman who stood by him as he rose to fame, endured years of infidelity, lies, and emotional neglect. Johnny's onstage charm, the quiet smile, the humble jokes, masked a private life filled with betrayal. He sang of love and salvation, but often lived the opposite. His devotion to June Carter, who would become his second wife, was real, but even she spent years pulling him from the wreckage of his own self-destruction. Cash's defiance became his armor. He sang for prisoners, railed against hypocrisy, and stood up for the voiceless. But those close to him say it also became his excuse. He thought pain made him holy, one friend recalled. He didn't believe in happiness, only redemption. And that belief gave him license to hurt others in the name of art. He'd vanish for weeks, leaving his family worried sick, then reappear on stage, raw and brilliant, as if nothing had happened. Even as he aged and embraced religion, the contradictions remained. He preached faith, but couldn't resist temptation. He sought forgiveness, but never truly changed his ways. When he recorded Hurt in his final years, it felt less like a song and more like confession. A man confronting the ghosts he'd carried for decades. Johnny Cash will always be one of country's greatest legends, but also one of its most haunted. His story isn't about good or evil. It's about the eternal war between them that played out inside a single man. And while the world still worships the man in black, those who knew him best remember something deeper. A genius who lived every sin he ever sang about.